Pascal Lamy, thank you very much for joining us at Asia House. You said that any agreement between Britain and the EU will be costly and complex, but what shape do you believe a final deal between the EU and the UK will take?
I think the most likely outcome after a long negotiation and a complex negotiation will be essentially free trade, although less free trade than being part of the internal market, but more free trade than falling in the WTO system, which, by the way, is not apocalyptic. So the problem is that the more ambitious you are in keeping trade open, the more complex this issue will be, because things are connected with one another. If I want road haulage to remain free, there will be some connection with the social legislation on driving times for lorry drivers. And this is not exactly trade, but if you level the playing field in areas, you have to do it in others. So it's going to be long, complex. We have to be ambitious, but we have to know that the more ambitious we are, the longer and the more complex it will be. And at the end of the day, it will have a higher cost than the present situation for UK, and hence for the European Union, because if it has a cost for UK, it has a cost for the continent, given that our trade relationship will remain a major one.
2 years. It seems unlikely from what you're saying that an agreement can be reached in the 2-year time frame.
That's my view.
So what sort of time frame do you believe is reasonable? 5 years? 10 years?
I think what has to be considered is not so much the timing of the negotiation, but the timing of the entry into force of the final regime, with, if necessary, transition period. So my guess, and it's a guess, would be that if we start now, the full exit with the full new regime will probably be there 10 years from now.
What happens then between year 2 and year 10? Will the same agreement largely still exist, that transitional relationship or arrangement that many are talking about?
That's a very good question, and it's a question that will need to be decided within the 2 first years. What is a sort of transition, continuation, bridging agreement? The framework of that, as by the way provided for by Article 50, will have to be taken into account, whatever that means. So this is part of the few things which will need to be decided from the very beginning. It's like building a house. You will need some structures to be there, and then you fill it, you put a roof, and then you put walls, and then you put stairs, and then you put rooms. But you have to have a sort of structure of what will happen, which, by the way, is very important for business. At the end of the day, of course, there is a political dimension there. But if at the end of the day there is agreement on both sides that we have to limit the cost of moving to this new situation, sort of damage limiting attitude, both sides should try and do that with goodwill.
There's been a lot of talk at Asia House from various experts and officials about the UK falling back on WTO schedules, and some say it will be very easy to do, others say it will be enormously complex. Given your background, can you give us a definitive answer? How easy or otherwise will it be for the UK to adopt WTO schedules when it leaves the EU?
Now, what I know from my WTO experience is that it depends. You can make it extremely complex and you can make it relatively simple, depending on goodwill and trust and the notion that we have pragmatically to address problems. Now, falling back into WTO regime, again, would not be apocalyptic. The WTO EU regime is an open one. The average tariff is low, but some cases for agriculture. The services markets are reasonably open. The subsidy ceiling in some areas are reasonably stringent. So, but I repeat, that would not be as good as a free trade agreement, and a free trade agreement will not be as good as what we have for the moment, which is internal market, which is zero border, zero control. Inevitably, the moment you have a border, which is what the UK wishes, you have the problems you have in administering a border, and this is at a cost for you, me, small businesses, big businesses, inevitably.
There's been much talk in the UK too about a new free trade agreements, particularly with Asia. Do you get a sense from your travels and from the officials with whom you speak that there's enthusiasm in Asia to do trade deals with the UK?
I think the answer to that will depend on what the view UK has about what is the proper trade policy for UK. I mean, it's in any way very strange, including for me as a sort of observer or expert, to see the amount of discussion you have on this without any clue on what the proper trade policy for the United Kingdom will be. A trade policy is something that serves your people, your economy. You usually protect places where you're not that competitive, but you don't want others to have the whole of the market. I mean, all these things need to be put in place. And discussing trade agreements with no clue about what a trade policy is doesn't make sense. Now, if you take the European Union negotiates trade agreement with a mandate from the Council of Ministers and the European Parliament and say we want more of this, less of that, because we believe this is good for the European Union, with Japan, with India, with whatever. UK will now need to do that on its own, and of course, what is good for the UK single will be different from what was good for the UK as a member of the European Union. And if I'm an Asian country, I will expect this to appear before I make any determination whether or not I would give more or less market access to UK single as compared to what I do with the European Union.
So you think the UK needs to get a trade policy in writing on the table for Asian countries?
And that's essential,
yeah.
Not least because this is a political discussion. I mean, sheep owners in the UK, including the Crown, who's a large sheep owner, will need to know whether or not New Zealand lamb is imported free, or at which tariff, or which quota, or that's the same for cheese. And these things matter a lot for the people who produce, and they need to know.
Are we on the verge of a complete change in world trading architecture, not just because of Brexit, but perhaps more so because of the protectionist agenda of the Trump administration? Are we looking at a period where multilateral deals will no longer exist?
I personally don't think so, but I recognize that this question is open and that we're all waiting to see how much of the protectionist America first Trump rhetoric will come into force in the coming months or years. So that's an open question. My own view, for what it's worth, is that globalization is so much done already. The interconnection, interpenetration of production system for goods and services is already so entangled that it would be very difficult to unentangle this, but I may be wrong. Now, my own sense is that even with a quite firm, let's say, rhetorically aggressive trade policy from the US, I still bet more on soft Trump than hard Trump. Mm-hmm. And the reason for that is that I think protectionism would be bad for the US first, hence for us. It probably would be bad for them before it's bad for us. So but I mean, I recognize that I may be optimistic in my judgment that this would be appreciated this way by not only the US President or the USTR or the Secretary of Commerce, but also by business, by lobbies, and by Congress, whether Senate or the House.
So where we are at the moment, hard Brexit, but soft Trump.
For the moment, that would be my bet. Yeah.
Pascal Lamy, thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure.